Welcome to Do It for the Gram, an Enneagram podcast with your host, certified Enneagram coach, Milton Stewart. Where we do it for the Enneagram, not Instagram. We make moves to improve our lives and those in our community. As you know, we're in the series of defense mechanisms. If you didn't listen to the first two episodes where me and Elizabeth Worm go deep into defense mechanisms and more, I definitely recommend you check those out before checking out your specific episode. But I know some people are going to look for their Enneagram number to listen to the podcast episode. So that's okay too. All right, let's go intro music. I'm super excited to announce my new partnership with BetterHelp. This episode is actually sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are struggling, BetterHelp can help. You'll receive 10% off your first month when you sign on using betterhelp.com/doit. So I'm super excited about this partnership that me and BetterHelp have entered into, because in this point where everything that we're doing right now to connect with people is more virtual, it is so important. Mental health, I think that aligns perfectly with things that we're trying to do, things that I want to do, and anybody that I would refer or think that could be potentially beneficial to the audience. And I think BetterHelp is definitely one of them. BetterHelp is basically, it's online counseling or therapy. So you're able to actually get some counseling or therapy depending on what's going on, from licensed counselors and therapists around the country. And you get to be able to get some of that one-on-one mental checkup that you may need, and BetterHelp's able to help you. So just go to betterhelp.com/doit, and you'll get a 10% discount for your first month. Defense mechanisms, they are tricky, okay? They're tricky because they really blend in with your ego type structure. And they're so unconscious. So you may have been doing this your whole life and not even knowing it and thought it was just a part of who you are, right? But a lot of times it's a defense mechanism, and it's basically stopping anything that trips up your ego, anything that feels like, I feel like I'm finna get vulnerable for the 8, or something's about to happen where it's going to deconstruct this ego I've already built up. So the defense mechanism kicks in. And we can believe it's just a part of who we are and the way that we actually operate. So we have to be very, very careful, because it stops our growth. That's why it's important to notice our defense mechanism when it's happening, because it actually stunts our growth. It really prevents us from going to further levels into our growth, because there's a point where the ego structure has constricted, it stops, and it uses the defense mechanism not to go any further or to go any deeper into areas we probably should be going into. For the type 8, because that's what we're talking about here, the type 8, I'm going to use the law of 3 to help kind of talk about the misconceptions 8s can have with reality. Yes, we all do have them. And I'm going to use the law of 3, and I got this from the narrative Enneagram, which they kind of use the law of 3 to describe the defense mechanisms. And I think they do a really great job of it. So I'm going to give a little bit here and part of like my own experience and different things I've experienced in working with 8s. So the type 8's ego believes it is strong and powerful as an ideal, okay? As an ideal, it believes that. This is usually very apparent when you see an 8. In order for this idealization of themselves to stay intact, they must avoid vulnerability and weakness. So if you believe you are strong and powerful, not that you can be, but that you are, then you actually avoid vulnerability and weakness, which is a part of reality, and everyone has it. And so you end up with the defense mechanism of denial. So the law of 3, which is basically, there are usually in life, which we get stuck in the duality. There's 2 different forces, but there's always a third force. And that's depending on the choice that we kind of make as a society or within yourself right now of how the results come out. So there's a reconciling force with it. So in order for the 8ness to believe on one end, I am strong, I am powerful, right? But at the other end, the other force is saying that I have vulnerabilities, I have weaknesses. And so, in order for those two, when those forces collide, and for the ego structure of the eight to try to stay intact, it has to go to a downward triangle, which is unhealthy, which it goes to defense mechanism of denial. And so it's saying, no, I'm going to deny that I'm weak that I can be weak and vulnerable because my ideal self is I'm strong and powerful, right? And so the law of three, which a triangle can also go upward, is when we learn to accept things and we learn to reconcile different parts of us that are seemingly contradict each other, but in reality, they all work together when we learn to accept things and reconcile situations and become more humble to them. That's for later. All right. So talking about denial, the description of denial is it's a powering up of the body center to override the feeling of vulnerability. It is also a lack of awareness and acknowledgement of their physical, mental, and emotional limitations. And so this is really tricky for eights because guess what? Denial goes along with the type structure. And when we talk about powering up, talk about challenging. And so denial can kind of almost feel like the type a little bit, but there's a difference. There's this interesting powering up that happens within eights. So either if it's outwardly against other people, there's a powering up, an even stronger force and energy that they bring in denying something, or it's a powering up on the inside if they're by themselves that they are like, no, I can do this. There's no vulnerability. There's no weakness here. So they're powering up even more and going to do things. And this can happen. You can see the results of this sometimes when eights super burn out without knowing it because they have denied some part of them that feels weak or vulnerable sometimes. And a lot of times that can lead to a breakdown of the body center, which leads to emotional and thought breakings down as well, those centers breaking down as well. So you have to be very careful with that. And so a real quick example how this may look for an eight. I'm going to give an example of I was in a particular session, and I'm not going to use this person's name or anything, but it was an eight, and he represented to me, I say that the very worst of what patriarchy has done to communities around the world. And this was a moment for this particular individual to be vulnerable because that was the place and the space that we were in. But this individual also had the ability to say, I'm not willing or ready to go there, which would have been totally fine. But denial kicked in and it turned into powering up against people, the teachers, people in the class, being disrespectful, demeaning people, saying that they're wrong or that they are against this individual, and that this person was treating other people wrong. No one else lived in that reality that this individual was living in. And everyone was really thrown off by this. But it was a strong denial of anywhere to become close to vulnerability or weakness. Strong denial. But here's the part about eights have to be careful with denial. Because when it comes out towards other people, because eight's energy is so strong, and even though it's a defense mechanism, remember, it's unconscious. It's not like eights are necessarily all the way trying to necessarily hurt people all the time or anything crazy like that. Far from it. But sometimes when denial kicks in, it can be so strong towards other people that they are disagreeing with, that they're going against what they say or anything, that it can be harmful and hurtful to other people because of the amount of force and energy they bring to conversations and denial. So they really have to be careful. That's why it's really important for eights to catch themselves if they get into a state of denial. Like, it is very important because it can be hurtful to other people that they care about, because the tricky part is that eights are normally truth tellers, as people kind of know them as. They're not the only truth tellers on the Enneagram, but they are a part of naturally being able to tell the truth. Here's the issue, though. Eight's truth, a lot of times, is their truth. It is their truth. So there's other truths that are out there that are also true along with their own truth. So sometimes that truth is also something that causes the eight to feel vulnerable or weak or it is an area that is weak or vulnerable for the eight. And so sometimes that can be really hard for eights to accept or to acknowledge or to respect that part of that truth that may not coincide with their own truth. And so that is a tricky area for eights to really watch out on, and really have to take a step back, really process it, and see if what they're saying or what is happening is actually denial and not just you're saying, your truth or protecting yourself, or, you're just right about the situation possibly, right? You might want to take a step back if denial is kicking in, if you're revving up because something vulnerable or something weak is being touched. Be careful. So you really have to be careful about this. Does your workplace stink because the culture sucks? Are you tired of tolerating people and wish you could all work together cohesively? Does going to work give you instant anxiety? If you say yes to any one of these, you should probably quit your job. But since you aren't going to quit your job, you should call Kaizen Careers. At Kaizen Careers, we are all about improving personal and workplace performance. We use a unique tool called the Enneagram. The Enneagram helps individuals and organizations become more self-aware. That self-awareness lends into helping organizations with communication, leadership, and conflict management, ultimately turning self-awareness into self-mastery and creating healthy workplace performance so you can improve your services and bottom line. You can reach Kaizen Careers at kaizencareers.com or 901-334-1644. Basically, with that defense mechanisms, eights have to be careful because it can be subtle, but it also can be strong. And the subtleties is more, what I mean by that is more usually not necessarily around people when it happens, or if it does, it happens inside and they become more bodily strong against something because they feel something or someone is against them or the way that they believe or perspective on something. So you have to really be careful in that space because it can look like the normal eight structure just doing its thing, challenging the status quo because they feel something is wrong, but they have to really be careful. That denial is a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope. So counteracting the defense mechanism. So for eights, give yourself permission to accept weakness and vulnerability as a part of yourself and life. So once again, the very important parts of that statement is give yourself permission to accept weakness and vulnerability. Okay. It doesn't have to be thrust upon you. It doesn't have to be forced upon you. A lot of times eights, the lust, it is the strength of things. Everything is a lot of times like it's just stronger. The energy and the power behind things are stronger. But for this one, you can reframe it and not think of yourself as having to allow it to be forced upon you. You can say, you can give yourself permission to accept weakness and vulnerability, which is a much better way of actually going into vulnerability and weakness. So your body, though usually very capable of doing many things in this world, it still has its limits. Weakness is a gift that helps you to realize that you need others in this world to help you. You cannot do it all or do it all the time. Personal limitations are invitations to include the gifts and abilities of others. Living a life without vulnerability is a trap. There is no freedom and deep connection without vulnerability. That yearning to trust someone fully with your most tenderness, who does not tell you that you're too much, cannot happen without your vulnerability. Also, sometimes the tendency of an eight is to get super vulnerable with someone. Remember, it's usually go big or go home with the eight ego structure. So they believe they trust so they can throw it all at this person instead of giving them like a layer by layer of vulnerability. So I want to make sure you understand sometimes eights trust people. Like they start to feel like really can trust them. So there's like, oh, I want to be able to trust you. So let me give you all of this. And it's a lot. And people aren't always able to handle all of it right away. Not that they cannot handle all of it, but they can handle it all the way, all of a sudden. So giving them layer by layer of vulnerability to see if you can trust them is a much better way. Not only does it create healthy emotional boundaries for you as an eight, because those things are tender as well, and people may not know that, but creating healthy emotional boundaries for yourself as well, just giving a little bit. And if you see that they can hold that tenderness that you give them, their vulnerability, their weakness, they can hold it with love, then you can say, okay, maybe I can give you a little bit more. Don't just give it all of a sudden all to them. because that is a lot for anyone. Okay. All right. The next thing to do to counteract the defense mechanism is don't put yourself in their shoes. Now, this sounds very counterintuitive, right? And I know that, but I'm going to bring it around. So sometimes when we put ourselves in their shoes, especially eights, you can end up saying, I wouldn't do that. Why wouldn't they? Or I would do that. Why wouldn't they? So that's tricky, right? So I would say try to be them in their shoes, because we often project what we do into what other people should do. So remember, eights, people do not process life as you do. So what you think is commonplace and expected is not the same for other people. This helps with denial, because denial is very tricky and it can show up as anything that goes against your thoughts or opinion of someone or something that seems not to be for or with you. So it is very important to make sure when you're trying to see another perspective, don't just put yourself in their shoes and say, that's what I would do if I was them. No. Try to be them in their shoes and give a little bit of innocence to them, looking at them and looking at it with more of a fresh eyes, instead of like coming 100% from your own perspective into theirs. So that's all I have for this episode. Short, sweet, quick, to the point. Super glad that you're here. One thing, I do have a new ebook that is out at kaizencareers.com. It is about like careers. It's short, sweet, simple, to the point. You can go there and go ahead and get that ebook. It's going to be very helpful. I also have another ebook coming out pretty soon. Make sure you get that one too when it comes out. It'll be marketed on all my platforms, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all these different ones that I'm on. It's going to be on there, so make sure to look out for those. Also, I'm super excited to announce my next Kaizen Complete Enneagram program, which is the cohort number 2. Right now, I'm working with cohort number 1. They're absolutely amazing. It's great. So I'm only taking 20 people at max to be able to do this community work with the Enneagram. We're going to be in there together. We work on ourselves. We learn about all the different parts of the Enneagram, and we learn in community. And so it's a really, really great, amazing, challenging, confidence building space for everyone who's a part of the cohort, for sure. So definitely excited about that. Also, if you want to become a patron and support this podcast, totally awesome. I appreciate that. Appreciate all the Patreon listeners and supporters out there. Thank you so much for keeping this podcast going. You can go to patreon.com/doitforthegram to support there. And besides that, there's some other big news coming out. You just have to stay tuned to different things that are going on. And if you feel as an 8 that denial is creeping up on you and you're about to power up in ways that aren't going to be helpful for you or those around you, take a deep breath, pause, and make a better choice. And do it for the gram, the Enneagram, of course. And I'll see you on our next episode. Have a good one. Bye.